the ability to embody wisdom, which is the higher self, the divine self, if you will. All of us have that. We have access to the divine self within us. But we also have our inner child. And so that's the foolish part, right? We have to retain the ability to be childlike and playful and foolish, because that's where creativity comes in and that's where fun happens, right? So we need to be the wise fool, and we also need to be of tough love. We need to have the toughness as needed, and we need the loving side. So in a way, if you think about it, this is the integration of your higher self with your child self and your masculine side with your feminine side. And all of that can reside in one human being.
Hello and welcome to the Mindful Entrepreneur Podcast. We're your hosts, Tati and Gerry Jimenez.
Join us as entrepreneurs and brother and sister interview inspiring leaders in different fields to explore how they've achieved results and fulfillment. Let's get started as soul, passion, and business come together at The Mindful Entrepreneur. Raj Sisodia is the co-founder and co-chairman of the movement Conscious Capitalism and has been a thought leader since its inception in 2008. His work has been highly influential in fostering a more humane, caring, and enriching way of doing business. Raj has written over 100 academic articles and 9 books, including the New York Times best-selling book, Conscious Capitalism, which he co-authored with John Mackey, co-founder of Whole Foods. He also co-authored the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Everybody Matters and Shakti Leadership, Embracing Feminine and Masculine Power in Business. His book, Firms of Endearment, How World-Class Companies Profit from Passion and Purpose, was named one of the 10 best business books of 2007 by Amazon.com. He was named one of the 10 outstanding trailblazers of 2010 and one of the top 100 thought leaders in trustworthy business behavior for 2010 and 2011. Raj was born in India and spent parts of his childhood in Barbados, California, and Canada. He has a bachelor's in electrical engineering, an MBA in marketing, and a PhD in marketing and business policy from Columbia University.
Hey, game changer. This is Gerry, founder of Vita Factor, where we help modern entrepreneurs strategize and grow their business.
And hello, I'm Tati, founder of The Genius Spot, where we help women lead with confidence and live mindful and productive lives.
Today, we're thrilled to be with a thought leader that pours heart and soul into all things related to conscious leadership. And as a true leader would, he walks the talk, helping elevate humanity through business, love, and caring. What an inspiring legacy you're creating. Raj, we are honored you're joining us here today. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be with you.
So to start out, we'll give our audience a bit of the inside scoop on how we first met. And this was back in 2011. At the Youth Entrepreneurship Summit, where you and other conscious leaders like John Mackey, your co-author in the Conscious Capitalism book, and also other people from the Conscious Capitalism movement were supporting entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, 25 under 35. Now, fast forward 6 years later, and we recently met up with you, Raj, at the launch of the Atlanta Conscious Capitalism chapter. So congratulations on the expansion that the Conscious Capitalism movement is having. And it's only been 6 years since we've reconnected, and a lot has happened with the Conscious Capitalism movement. Can you share more about what it is and the philosophy behind it?
Sure. So Conscious Capitalism is a movement that started in 2008, so almost 10 years now, about 9 years. And it's basically trying to change the story about business. What is business really all about? You know, over the last couple of 100 years, a certain kind of narrative has evolved around capitalism, and economists and business school professors and many have started to believe that business is about a few things, that it's about profit maximization, or basically business exists only to make money, that shareholders are the primary stakeholders in the business. Everybody else is a means to that end of producing wealth for shareholders. And we believe that this is a very narrow perspective on business. It's also very self-centered. It only looks at what you can get out of it as a business owner. And it also treats people as objects and as a sort of a means towards fulfilling your goals. We believe that there's a much richer narrative about business that can exist. And it's similar to the journey of consciousness for for us as human beings. We start out being very self-centered. We start out simply being there to accumulate and to consume, maximize our own material well-being. But over time, we also evolve to higher levels of consciousness, and we start to recognize ourselves as instruments of service, and that is the vehicle for achieving the greatest amount of fulfillment and meaning, and therefore happiness in our lives. And the same actually can apply to organizations. And organizations too actually have many impacts on many different stakeholders: customers, employees, their families, communities, the environment, suppliers, investors, etc. And all of the impacts that you have on these different stakeholders are the result of your actions. And you can actually do business in a way that has a positive impact on all of them in multiple ways, not just financial, but in terms of emotional well-being, spiritual well-being, physical well-being, and so forth. But beyond that, you can also give people meaning and purpose in their life through work. And you can also create a work environment where people are not only productive, but also happy and fulfilled. So, all of the elements of the business, starting with why do we exist? So there's a higher purpose, it's not just profit. What do? We don't just create value for shareholders, we create value for all stakeholders. Who are we as leaders? We're not just there to use people to achieve our goals. We're there to mentor, motivate, develop, inspire people, and elevate their lives. And how do we do it? We don't just create this climate of fear and stress, which traditional companies do, but actually we create a climate of trust and fun and caring. So it answers all the big questions in a different way: why, what, how, and who. And this is a fundamentally different way of thinking about business that we're finding is not only better for people and better for the planet and better for communities, but also more successful. So there's really no reason not to do this. It doesn't come with any trade-offs.
That is so interesting. When you talk about it, actually creates more success for companies and organizations. Raj, do you think this is applicable for the smaller businesses as well?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this applies to any size of business in any sector of the economy, because ultimately businesses are comprised of people. And this recognizes what it actually takes to get people engaged, to get people motivated, to get them inspired, and how to actually serve them. So to the extent that we have people in any kind of business, these ideas will work, because this appeals to some universal human values and human needs that we all have.
Wonderful. Thank you, Raj. I love hearing that. So you see that conscious capitalism as a movement can elevate humanity because it not only allows people to serve and be happier and more fulfilled, but also because ultimately it increases the bottom line for organizations and companies, correct?
Yeah, so it generates more financial wealth for society in general. Society needs financial wealth as well, because without financial wealth, we don't have taxation. Taxes only are based on profits. And without taxes, we don't have the resources that we can invest in infrastructure, in public education, in healthcare, all the things that we need as societies to function. That wealth has to be created by businesses. Governments don't create wealth. Governments can only spend, the wealth that was generated through taxes. So financial wealth is an important thing, not just for companies and investors, but for society. And conscious companies are very profitable companies, and profit is a social good. We believe that not to be profitable is socially irresponsible, because that means you're not being efficient, effective, you're not using society's resources in an appropriate way. But it matters a great deal how you make the money. Because if you make the money by squeezing your people and by squeezing your suppliers and by pushing all kinds of burdens onto society and onto the environment and into the future, then you're not really creating value. You're just sucking value, you're extracting value. And you're not a business, you're a parasite. A business by definition creates value. More than it takes in, it actually generates a larger amount of value. And those are true businesses that actually do that. So that's the philosophy I think we need to adopt, to recognize that the so-called side effects of traditional business, which they say, well, we're all about making money, and everything else that happens, people's health is affected, people get stressed out, the heart attacks go up, cortisol levels shoot up, people's children are affected, their families are affected, their communities. We sell products to customers that may not be good for them, their health and well-being is affected. All these other things happen as a consequence of how we choose to operate. And many businesses will say, well, those are just side effects and they don't matter. But the fact is they all matter. There's no such thing as a side effect. We do things, they are effects. And this is about doing business with a spectrum of positive effects, as opposed to accepting the very idea of negative side effects. It doesn't have to be.
I love that. I've worked in organizations where if you're having too much fun, it's almost like you're not working hard enough.
I think the younger generation, entrepreneurs, millennials, etc., do seek that. You know, they're intuitively purpose driven. They want to do something meaningful. It's not just a way to make a living. It's a way to actually shape a life, and also recognizing that work doesn't have to be drudgery and it can be fun. And that actually we are more creative when we're having fun. You know, you can't be serious and then be creative, really. I mean, for the most part, you know, in most ventures, you know, you really do have to have that childlike sort of playfulness in order to come up with new ideas.
I had a question talking about companies and more specifically leadership. In your book, Shakti Leadership, you mentioned there's a crisis in leadership and a need for conscious leaders. That could be more evident, especially in the aftermath of the tragedy in Charlottesville or other events around the globe. And I'm not sure if you know, Raj, but Charlottesville is very dear to us. My family and I live here, walking distance from UVA. And with the recent events that took place, there's obviously a great sense of loss, and people are looking to make a difference. What message would you have for the people in Charlottesville or anywhere who are looking to be change?
Well, I think Charlottesville is a beacon for a lot of people. You know, I've got a dear friend who teaches there, Ed Freeman, who's a central figure in our movement, the father of stakeholder theory. Yeah. He's a long-standing professor there. It also reflects some of the energy and vision of Thomas Jefferson, who also was in many ways the architect of the American DNA as the author of the Declaration of Independence, and stands for those universal human values that we are all created equal and we're entitled to life, liberty, and those are beautiful, inspiring words for humanity, and they came out of that place. So I think in some ways what happened there, of course, was very unfortunate, but I think, as Viktor Frankl said, we can take a tragedy and make a triumph out of it. We can find meaning in our suffering.
Yes.
Because we cannot really control what happened. People of Charlottesville, as wonderful as they are, could not control the fact that this group from all over the country decided to descend upon Charlottesville and do this thing. But you can certainly control how we respond.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the heartening thing about what's going on right now is, to a large extent, the responses that people are having. We just had a big set of rallies in Boston on Saturday in response to some other such rallies that were planned here, and the counter-protesters outnumbered them, by something like 500 to 1, right? So what this is doing is awakening inside people the consciousness that we cannot take certain things for granted. We thought certain battles were over 200 years ago, 150 years ago, 50 years ago. And it turns out that, there is still that, the germ of those diseases still exists. And we have to be vigilant. And I think it brings us new appreciation about what really matters and what we have to do to protect the things that are precious in our civilization. So I think that's the positive thing, that this is going to actually elicit and awaken people to snap out of their complacency and to become active in defense of the values that all of us hold dear. I think we have been on a journey of waking up, of consciousness that's been going on for a few decades. We mark a turning point roughly around 1990 in our book, Films of Endearment. We said this is the beginning of the age of transcendence, where we're going beyond just those material concerns that we had in the past, and now we're looking to higher level things. But as you know, any journey is not linear. It doesn't just go like this, it goes kind of like this, right? So you have these setbacks, and then you start a new period of growth out of that setback.
Right.
And I think that's what's happening now. This is a pushback from the old order. There's a set of things that have happened. Certain people have become empowered. Attitudes have changed, but there were people who, under the old paradigm, were in a advantageous situation, and now they're feeling that it's like you said, when we're having fun, other people think they're losing something, right? When some people are being elevated in society and achieving basic human dignity and rights, other people feel like something is being lost for them. And so, it's the old order that's kind of rising up. The analogy I've been using is like Star Wars. One episode was The Force Awakens, right? Which is the consciousness that's been awakening. But then the second episode is The Empire Strikes Back. So patriarchy, the establishment, the traditional power centers are sort of rising up to try to hold on, to that which seems to be slipping away. But that never really works, because ultimately, we are evolving in a certain direction, and you cannot stand, in the way of that progress, I believe. So the third episode then is the return of the Jedi, right? And I think that's, to me, what's going to happen here, that people are getting awakened by the millions, and we will resume our forward march, because that's our destiny, right? Our consciousness, there is a trajectory to evolution. We are meant to evolve towards higher levels of consciousness and togetherness and love. And these short-term setbacks are really just challenges that we have to overcome, and then we start moving forward again.
Yeah, there were a lot of nuggets of wisdom in everything you said there. So thank you. One thing that talking about as we transcend and move to a higher consciousness, something that you also mentioned in the book is you cannot solve a problem from a old state. You have to elevate your consciousness. And so you mentioned, you reference sort of like the Jedi comes, the return of the Jedi. The conscious leader has to be a new type of leader that can have a better, broader, wiser view. So that brings me to my question. How do you define a conscious leader?
Yeah, well, there are a number of ways in which we come at that. First of all, as you said, leaders do need to have the ability to see the bigger picture, right? And to see the future before it even happens. What is a possible future? The future hasn't happened, but they can visualize that, right? So I think great leaders truly have that visionary ability. Now, what that means is that you're able to rise above, the level at which everybody else is operating, right? And then when you rise above, you can see the patterns, and you can also see how things are interconnected and interdependent. So you have that systems mind, right? And then you also have the ability to see and visualize, conceptualize a better future, right? And then it's like you're working from that future back. So this is where we're going, right? This is what our vision is, creating that vision. I think leaders are really great. Conscious leaders are really good at that vision, holding that vision and then conveying that and enrolling people in that possibility. People may not even think it's possible, right? But leaders convince them that it is and give them the confidence to go there. Beyond that, conscious leaders, we use the acronym selfless. This is, I have an acronym for all of these different 4 pillars, but this one I think is most appropriate, because a leader who is not selfless is therefore selfish, right? Right. And that means that they are using other people to achieve their objectives as they have defined for themselves, really. The organization's objectives might be secondary to their own, because they want to raise the stock price because they have millions of stock options, and by the way, that will also raise the value of the company. But ultimately, they're coming from a place of self-serving interest, right? So a person who is using other people and using the organization to achieve their goals, that's not a leader, that is a tyrant. It's the very definition of a tyrant, somebody who uses other people to achieve their goals. A leader is actually somebody who, as I said, creates a vision and helps people get there by using all of their strengths and their talents collectively to figure out what's the right strategy and who does what. So you have to be selfless. You have to transcend the self. That means that you're an evolved human being who has not only achieved self-actualization, but you've gone beyond self-actualization to self-transcendence. So Maslow would have said self-actualization is the ultimate, like you become who you're meant to be. It is still kind of ego-based, right? Yeah. It's like if this organization is part of my self-actualization, that means everything is about me still, right? As opposed to saying that I am now transcended the self and I'm here in service to the collective self, right? Which is the organization, and then beyond that to society. So we have to have that ability of a leader to be at that level. And very few leaders are. I mean, most leaders, and you can talk about all of our national political leaders, very much in their ego, and they're playing power games, and they're all about themselves, right? It's not about service. But we need leaders in business and in politics to be about that. And beyond that, then selfless stands for the qualities, right? So you have to be strong. Obviously, leaders have to be strong because there are plenty of obstacles and challenges that always will present themselves. And unless you have that, the courage of your convictions, the inner resolve, the spine of steel, you cannot stand up to all of those pressures. But then stands for all the other qualities as well, great energy and enthusiasm, right? Long-term orientation. You're not just thinking about next year, next quarter, next year. You're not even just thinking about how long you will be leader. You're thinking about hundreds of years, decades, and beyond. Extreme long-term. While you're also paying attention to what's happening right now. You're flexible. You're not just always showing up in the exact same way. The shorthand for that we have developed with the Shakti leadership work is that a conscious leader is the wise fool of tough love. They have the ability to embody wisdom, which is the higher self, the divine self, if you will. All of us have that. We have access to the divine self within us. But we also have our inner child. And so that's the foolish part, right? We have to retain the ability to be childlike and playful and foolish, because that's where creativity comes in and that's where fun happens, right? So we need to be the wise fool, and we also need to be of tough love. We need to have the toughness as needed, and we need the loving side. So in a way, if you think about it, this is the integration of your higher self with your child self and your masculine side with your feminine side. And all of that can reside in one human being. Okay, you have to have the ability to integrate yourself on those dimensions. And most of us have a tendency to go on one side of each of those axes, right? And we need to therefore cultivate the other. If we have a tendency to always be tough, we need to figure out how do we become more loving. If we have a tendency to always be coming from wisdom, we need to figure out how do we lighten up, right? So there are ways we can cultivate that. And once you've done that work, once you've become a whole person by integrating those two dimensions, then you also need the flexibility to say, in this situation, what is called for? Do I need to be tough? Do I need to be loving? Do I need to be, light-hearted and playful? Or do I need to be wise, etc. So that's another quality, flexibility. And then, of course, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and systems intelligence. And these are, again, all of us start with a certain level of these things, but they can all be developed. IQ cannot really be changed, but EQ, emotional intelligence, can be. We can learn as well with spiritual intelligence, and this is developing a systems mind. So those are the qualities as we see of conscious leaders. The biggest thing, again, the combination of toughness and love. If you look at the great leaders who changed the world for the better, they embody both of those. So if you look at Lincoln or Gandhi or Mandela or King or Ashoka in India or many others, in history, unfortunately, there haven't been that many because most leaders have been warriors. Most leaders like Alexander the Great, so-called, or Akbar in India. I mean, they're basically conquering and killing and expanding, and it's all about power and ego and the riches and the gold and all that. They don't build anything lasting or anything that elevates human beings, to a higher level of existence. The leaders who do are the ones that embody love and strength. The ones that are only about strength cause enormous pain and suffering, and they almost destroyed human civilization in the last century between Hitler and Mao and Stalin and so forth. So that's what we need in conscious leaders.
Fantastic. Great definition and very multidimensional. What a great approach.
Tune in to the next episode where we continue our conversation with Raj, and he reveals how conscious companies outperform their competitors 9-1, and he talks about the silent revolution that's taking place.
Hey, and before you leave, both the Genius Spot and Vita Factor want to thank you, our awesome audience, for being part of our podcast. And if you found this episode of value, please share it with your friends and loved ones so they too can join the Mindful Entrepreneur.